right, so I mentioned last time we were going to start talking about monopolies. That is indeed what we're going to do. So specifically, more generally, we're going to talk about something called pricing power. Right? So what is pricing power? Let's start out with pricing power occurs when the price at which your good sells varies based on your production decision. Which is another way of saying that you have some control over your price. So up to now, as I've mentioned a couple of times, we've been living in a world in which the market is so big relative to your size that you really have no control over your own price, right? You sort of have to set what the going rate is. If you try to sell for more than that, no one's going to buy from you, right? However, that's obviously not always true, right? And so the situation we've been in is the one where nobody has any pricing power. Right? You're completely beholden as a producer to whatever the market sort of sets the price to be based on supply and demand. But if you have pricing power, that means that you have a choice. You're still sort of subject to what the demand curve is. You can't like force everybody to pay zillions of dollars for your product if they don't want to, but you can play around with what point on the demand curve you want to be at. You can choose, do I want to produce more stuff but sell it at a lower price? Or do I want to produce less stuff but sell it at a higher price? Right? You can make this trade-off here. As opposed to a competitive market where each firm is too small to shift the price. So there's two things that we're going to talk about in relation to pricing power. One is, where does it come from? Right? What is it that gives you pricing power? And it's going to turn out that it's going to be basically anything that takes us away from this part right here. The competitive aspect of the market is what takes pricing power away. The fact that there is competition is what makes you not really able to set your own prices, because everyone else is going to compete in a way. So anything that takes us away from this, that's where the pricing power is going to come from. Then once we figure out where the pricing power comes from, we will also be talking about what are the implications of that pricing power. What does it mean for a market to exist where people have, where the suppliers have pricing power in that market? So this is a particularly important topic for a number of reasons. I mean, one, back when a lot of these competitive market theories were sort of developed in the first place, a lot more markets were a lot more competitive than they are today. Right? A lot of the most important markets were like agricultural markets. Where goods were pretty interchangeable between producers, and there were lots and lots of little independent farmers and things like that. Today, a lot of markets are less competitive than they used to be. And there's lots of things you can point to for that, why that is. I mean, brand name goods, right? We're going to talk about ways in which just the fact that people care about brands gives you a little bit of pricing power. Large conglomerates, right? There's just more concentration in different markets. New technology can be a source of pricing power as well. If you have technology that nobody else has, then there's obviously less competition for what you're doing. And so models that include pricing power in them are going to be a little bit more representative of a lot of modern markets in a way that the competitive market model won't be. Competitive market model is still useful, right? First of all, we needed it to get to this point where we can talk about this stuff. And second, that logic still does hold in a lot of places, but we want to talk about pricing power as well. Here's some examples of markets getting more concentrated over time, and for a very short period of time. This only goes back to 1982. If you go back even further than that, you would see similar trends continuing. But say, so this is a measurement of the Herfindahl index. Sorry, it's a measurement of how concentrated a market is, which is an indicator that there might be some pricing power. The fewer competitors there are, the bigger this number will be, and the more pricing power there's. So manufacturing's gotten a little bit more concentrated. Utilities, finance, retail by a lot. Look how much more concentrated retail has gotten. This was sort of the time period over which you had like Walmart, Target sort of becoming a thing. A lot of independent retailers went out of business, and these days Amazon, wholesale trade, services. A lot of these things are just getting more concentrated over time. And this also stops. This goes back to this only goes to like 2013 or something. 2012. So, as I mentioned, we got to think about where is this pricing power coming from? What is it that gives a firm pricing power, the ability to set its own prices? And then also, what are they going to do with it, right? What's the consequences of that pricing power? So, where does that pricing power come from? Lots of different sources, but they all sort of are variants on a theme. And that theme is, and pricing power comes whenever competition is limited by some means. Right? There needs to be something that keeps out competitors from competing with you in the first place, and that's where the pricing power comes from. You can sort of, one way to think about it is there a barrier to entry? Is there something keeping people out from competing with you? If you recall, back in our competitive market discussions when we talk about long-term stuff, right? What happens if there's a positive profit, right? If you have a positive profit in a competitive market, that means that other firms somewhere else are going to see that positive profit. They're going to say, oh, hey, I want some of that profit. They will join the market. It'll drive prices down, and eventually the profit will go away. Right? That was the competitive market story. So for that to not happen, there needs to be something that stops the step where they come into the market and drive prices down, right? There needs to be something there that's keeping them from doing that. They need to be able to look at the profits over there, say, hey, look at all those profits. I want those profits, and yet they're not going to come in and compete against you, right? Because if they do, then this pricing power is not going to hold. At the very least, it's going to be temporary. But if there's something stopping them, then this can hold on for a long time. So here are the sources of pricing power that we're going to talk about. So we're talking about exclusive control over important inputs, patents and copyrights, limited licensing, and the one that I thought that I cut, but I just moved here, is network economies. We'll talk about all these one at a time. So first, exclusive control over important inputs. So this is sort of a feature of business behavior. Has a business behaved in such a way that it has gotten control over an important input to production? To produce any good, you need certain inputs, right? You just need certain stuff in order to be able to produce. If one firm has control over those inputs, then obviously no one else is going to be able to compete against them, right? There's just nothing you can do. Let's talk about, for example, real estate in a given city like Seattle or something like that. So if one person owns a huge portion of the real estate in Seattle, and the price of that real estate keeps going up and up and up, someone else could say, hey, look how good real estate's doing in Seattle. I want to be in that market. But in order to do that, I have to have some real estate in Seattle. Who am I going to buy it from? Well, if one person already owns it, then I don't really have a way into the market. There's nothing I can do. They control the input, right? Seattle is not a case where one person really owns all the real estate, but there are a lot of smaller company towns where really one company or firm does own a massive portion of all real estate. No one would be able to compete against them in the real estate in that area. Another good example of this is diamonds, right? So why are diamonds so expensive? We already talked about diamond versus water, why people are willing to pay so much for diamonds. But even if people are willing to pay so much for diamonds, why is the price so high anyway? There's lots of things people would be willing to pay a lot more for than they do. Right? I'd pay thousands and thousands of dollars for a laptop. It's that important to me to have a laptop, but I don't have to, right? I can get away with paying a few $100. So why are diamonds expensive, but laptops not so expensive? Well, one reason is that De Beers owns all the diamonds. Right? There's only so many places in the world that you can get diamonds. One company owns all the diamond mines. Well, then they can choose to have higher prices and sell a lower quantity. This is exactly what they do. They've got big old warehouses full of diamonds that they choose not to sell because they have chosen to sell fewer diamonds but charge a higher price for them. And everybody else looking in can say, oh, look how much money they're making. I would like to compete against them. But what are you going to do? Where are you going to get your diamonds from to compete against them? They're the ones who have all the diamonds, so there's nothing you can do. Right? You can't compete against them. Here's another example. Sometimes this exclusive control can only be temporary, but it still works. So soft soap. So it might be surprising to know, but the idea of having soap in a hand pump is a relatively new one. If you go back only a few decades, it just wasn't really a thing. In 1980, for example, as recently as this, soft soap sort of invented the concept of putting soap in a small hand pump. Didn't really exist before that. If you ever been to some older restaurants, something like that, you go to the bathroom, they got little powder dispensers in the bathroom, that's sort of the kind of thing that you would do before this was around. So they invented this concept. They're like, hey, what if we put soap in a hand pump? They tested it out. People really, really liked it. That's how we had a hit on our hands. But if we just start going on the market with this, then all the big competitors are going to come out. They're going to beat us, right? They're going to produce the same thing. They're going to sell it for cheaper. They're going to drive us out of the market. We're not going to make any money. So what do? They called up all the factories that make these little pumps, which was not a lot at the time because this was not a particularly widespread product. Right? They called up the factories that made those pumps, and they said, we're going to buy your entire production line for 3 years. You are not allowed to sell to anybody else. We will buy everything that you make, but you're not allowed to sell to anybody else. Okay? So what does this do? This gives them exclusive control over necessary input. You can't sell hand pump soap without a hand pump, right? And so if they start making soft soap and it's profitable, then everybody else can look at them and say, hey, I want to make hand pump soap too. Let me buy some hand pumps so I can do this. Oh, no, wait, there are no hand pumps. They bought up the entire production. So nobody's going to be able to compete against them, which is going to give soft soap pricing power. That's what happened. They came out with soft soap. It was a massive hit. Everyone loved it. They sold a bunch of stuff. All the other companies, soap companies were like, hey, we want to compete against them. They couldn't find any hand pumps to do. Now, of course, over time, they managed to open up new hand pump factories and get around this, but it took time. And in the time that it took them to expand that supply of hand pumps, soft soap got really, really big into a giant profitable company. And then they got bought by, I don't know, I think Dial maybe bought them or something like that for billions of dollars. So for that short period of time, they had exclusive control over this market. No one could compete against them, and they made a lot of money because one thing that pricing power does do, and we'll get to this in the implications, is that it allows you to make a lot of profit. This is one reason, by the way, why you see tech companies buying startups all the time. Even if the startup doesn't seem like it really does much of anything. There's a bunch of people out there who can replicate your software. You don't have pricing power. But what if you just pay off all the best engineers by buying them? If a good engineer goes out and makes a new company, you're like, hey, that person has the ability to replicate our software. That would take away our exclusive control. So why don't we just buy their company, hire that person, and now nobody else can compete against them because they don't have the important input of top-notch engineering. Yeah.
They also, I heard, like, they go in there and like just take their ideas and then they kind of just like do away with them.
Yeah, they sort of fold all the ideas into the main company, right? Which is another thing, right? Those ideas are no longer out there. They can't compete against you, right? So you have exclusive control over both the engineers and then also whatever products they work in. Yeah, so you buy the company, no one else can compete against you. It allows you to keep your prices. It allows you to keep control over your own prices.